Revenge travel is in full swing. An estimated 235 million tourists traveled internationally in the first quarter, more than double the same period last year. A high percentage of those tourists consist of persons with disabilities, or PWDs. For them, the travel experience is too often inaccessible, uncomfortable, and expensive. And getting from point A to B can even mean serious injury for some. Accessibility issues in global travel remain a huge barrier for many disabled customers. In the U.S., for example, a survey of PWDs shows about 90% have experienced flight problems and around 80% have gone through transport issues. Almost all of the respondents said they have faced problems with accommodations while traveling. In Britain, about 70% of people with limited mobility have avoided flying altogether because of difficulties. Well, traveling can be a headache for many tourists, but they can be a nightmare for most disabled customers. The challenges run from the lack of accessible booking services to lost or damaged mobility aids at the airport. Hurdles follow them to their hotels, toilets, and public places they will visit. Inclusion means enabling everyone to enjoy the freedom to travel. A recent survey by the Valuable 500, a global business collective of 500 CEOs and their companies, shows 10 cities are leading the way in recognizing and providing the needs of disabled travelers. These cities were nominated by the disabled. Valuable 500 says it's no coincidence that these cities are also some of the world's most interconnected ones and serve as gateways to their regions. Steve Lai and Elizabeth Neo spoke with Caroline Casey, the founder of the Valuable 500 and a disability activist. They started by asking her what Singapore did right to win top spot on that list.
Firstly, as you said, this was 3,500 people with disabilities themselves with lived experience, which is really important. It's not the Valuable 500 companies, it's the disability community. Well, there's two or three things. One you may or may not agree with, but the pedestrian ways and the pathways within Singapore are pretty fantastic. Actually, 95% of your pedestrian ways, your bus stops, your taxi stands are accessible. That's quite unheard of. And that's not just for people with disabilities with mobility issues, but it's actually for travellers with bags and wheelchairs or mums with buggies. And that concept of universal design is very much now being embedded into Singapore. But the thing that we are very excited about is in September last year, in 2022, the government announced its Enabling 2030 plan. And it is committed to making sure all of the 29 recommendations are going to be achieved by 2030, which really positions Singapore not just as a good destination to travel to, but as a society that's fully inclusive of people with disabilities. And that is quite game-changing. So there's many reasons, and I've been back and forth to Singapore over the years, and I've seen even a huge improvement in the last 7 or 8 years. And I think that's because the government have taken this ownership, engaging with civil society and engaging with business.
Now, for people that aren't PWDs that might take a lot of these things that you've been talking about for granted, could you help us understand? You mentioned 29 initiatives. Give us a flavour of some of them.
Well, firstly, I'm just going to say people with disabilities, you currently, either of you may not have a disability. I do. I'm registered blind. I might not look it, but that's the point, because actually 80% of disability in the world is invisible, believe it or not. The other issue to remember is 80% of disabilities acquired between the ages of 18 and 64. 18% of Singapore population today has a disability, but you too will have a disability as well. So this is not a conversation just for those people, it's for all of us. But just for me, for an example, I'm a registered blind person. When I was flying here on a plane, when I asked for assistance, they said, get into the wheelchair. And I'm like, I don't need to get into a wheelchair. My legs are fine. I just can't see any of the signposts. I can't see where to go. So it's our understanding of all the different experiences. But from a travel aspect, are your apps, the Uber app, is that working? Is that accessible? When I go to a reception desk as a visually impaired person, they're asking me to sign in a form or do it on an iPad. Is it accessible? So that's a very simple menus in restaurants. So they're just quite some simple things. And I think what we need to remember is disability is one tiny word that covers so many different experiences. But if we really include the disability community in designing those products and services, then it will be good for everyone. Could you imagine airports to be good for people with disabilities? They would be brilliant for everyone. And let's be honest, airports are stressful at the best times. They are horrible. So yeah, there's very many things. And I think that the very simple things, which is really an impressive part of what Singapore is doing, is looking at elevators, escalators, changing rooms. You know, if you've got a wheelchair, you're not going to fit into the same changing room. Do you need a hoist to get into a swimming pool? And a lot of these things, and that not only helps the disability community, but the ageing population, right? So when you put that together, the disability market alone is worth 13 trillion. And that's before we add on the significant spending power of the ageing market together. So if Singapore wants to be inclusive of travellers, it needs to have the disability community as part of it, because otherwise it's keeping money out of the country. Now, why would you do that? I mean, doesn't tourism act for 4% of your global, of your economy? So why on earth would you not want to take some of that market?
Yeah, exactly. So I want to ask you, how much in economic potential can countries realize when they make more inclusive travel, or basically infrastructure, buildings, public spaces more inclusive? How much more in economic value can they realize?
Well, look, I'm going to give you the valuable 500's headquarters are in the UK. I'm Irish, but we are headquartered in the UK. And do you know that the disposable spending power of the disability community with a mother and a father is 249 billion, right? Now, you tell me, why do you not want, as an economy, why would you stop that money flowing by not having accessible products and services? And the issue really is why are we not investing in the disability community so we can release that potential, rather than that be a dependency on a society? And it is, I think a lot of people have seen this as quite niche before, going, oh, well, that's just for disability. But once again, I keep trying to say it, if we make things accessible and inclusive for people with disabilities in all experiences, you're making the experience better for everybody. And that's the point. When people are happy, they will return as customers. They will return as tourists. But if you're making it difficult, they won't. And let's be honest, we like to travel as families, right? So what about your mother and your father who may have accessible needs? Do we just leave them behind? And Asia has wonderful weather. We come here for the sunshine. So don't keep us out because of inaccessible or uninclusive experiences. And look at Airbnb. Airbnb, it's a really successful company. And what it's doing now is ensuring it has an accessibility review. It's not just a thing that they talk about on the International Day of People with Disabilities or Global Accessibility Awareness Day. They do an accessible review looking at which of their properties are the most accessible, releasing out what are the top 10, noticing that they're getting a 450% increase in the hosts, making sure that their properties are accessible. And that's tree houses and domes, as well as just a normal house.
Yeah, so are you seeing a lot more traction then nowadays? I mean, it's called the Valuable 500 at the moment, but surely that number is just going to grow and grow.
Well, look, the Valuable 500 is 500 of the world's biggest companies and their CEOs working in partnership to end disability exclusion. What's brilliant about us is we've got the CEOs. So we've got the CEOs of Microsoft, Google, Apple, EY, Verizon. We have them all. And Singtel we have here, and Flex, right? The Valuable 500 is saying that the disability community and its spending power and its innovation and insight is valuable for business. It's not saying the 500 companies are fantastic. They're committed to not only improving what they do with disability, but that influence will change the way society works. Because we believe inclusive business will create inclusive society. Governments can't do this on their own. And I respect hugely what the Singaporean government is doing. It's one of the best in the world in doing that. But it does need the support and partnership of business to truly transform the business and society at large.
Yeah, Caroline, I do want to ask you a final question too. Are businesses adequately supported to, make these enhancements?
Well, that's a really interesting question. As far as I'm concerned, is they should take responsibility and accountability themselves to be investing. They shouldn't need government supports to do that. As far as I'm concerned, the government should be focusing on things like the Enabling 2030 plan, looking at society in general. But in most countries, our governments do support businesses, particularly in the accessibility of buildings, because that's another thing that Singapore has done here since 2019, really kind of put a pressure on making sure that our physical environments are accessible. But business shouldn't see this as a cost. You see, I hate this always being a cost.
It should be an opportunity.
Well, it's an investment. Because can I just say, the investment in the insight and innovation the disability community brings, remember that remote controls were designed for blind people to watch TVs. I'm blind. SMS texting was designed for deaf people to communicate, but we all do it. The insight and innovation that a different experience brings to differentiate a business, a product, or a country. And you talk about revenge travel, this whole thing, we've come back out of the pandemic. I think there's huge traction here in the tourism and travel industry. And this is a great opportunity for growth for our countries and our businesses. Why would you keep out 20% of the population? That is sheer madness.